Abu Muhammad al-Julani, although his real name is Ahmed Hussein al-Shara. Often cited as now being the de facto leader of Syria, he has deep ties to Al-Qaeda and several other jihadist organizations.
Sounds like a reasonable leader to control a country, no? Hi guys, this is Sahar TV, and you're probably asking yourself, what's going on in Syria? Who are these Syrian Muslim soldiers committing these crimes? So in this video, we'll watch a 5-minute history explanation explaining exactly who Hayat Tahrir al-Sham are. Buckle up, it's going to be a wild ride. Let's take a look.
Who are HTS? HTS, or Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, their name means the Organization of the Liberation of the Levant. The group came to international prominence in 2024, following their successful offensive first on the city of Aleppo, held by Syrian government forces, and then their subsequent offensive to the south that eventually ended in the capture of Damascus, the Syrian capital, and the fleeing of the Syrian president Bashar al-Assad, thus hopefully bringing an end to the Syrian civil war that has raged on since 2011. But many people had never heard of this rebel organization in the first place. So who are HTS? A good place to start may be with their leader, Abu Muhammad al-Julani, although his real name is Ahmed Hussein al-Shara. Often cited as now being the de facto leader of Syria, he has deep ties to Al-Qaeda and several other jihadist organizations.
Sounds like a reasonable leader to control a country, no?
Having been part for a long time of a Syrian branch called Al-Nusra Front. He became radicalized in the early 2000s, in 2003 going to Baghdad to fight against the American invasion of Iraq. In 2011, he would be back in his native Syria fighting against the forces of President Bashar al-Assad in the civil war that was developing in the country. Initially, the main rebels that were fighting the government were the FSA, or Free Syrian Army, made up of several regiments defecting from the Syrian army to join the rebels. However, as the Syrian government looked around for allies to fight against the rebels, they largely relied on various Shia powers, particularly those of Iran and their proxies in Iraq and in Lebanon, particularly Hezbollah in the latter. This meant that the conflict took on a particularly sectarian divide. Because the enemy were largely Shia, it fell to many of the Sunni jihadist movements to arm and supply those Syrian rebels fighting against the government, thus leading to the coming to prominence of largely Islamist Sunni groups in the fighting rather than more secular rebels. One of these groups was the Al-Nusra Front, which is the front of the supporters of the people of Syria and the Essentially, Al-Nusra have their roots in being the affiliate of Al-Qaeda in Syria. So,
if you're asking yourself why the Druze community is being persecuted in Syria or other minorities being persecuted in Syria, it's exactly because of that. Devoted Muslims. Muslims that follow the Quran almost to the letter. That's why they look at Druze and other minorities as apostates or people that are eligible for violence. Don't let al-Julani's appearance fool you. He is a terrorist wearing a suit.
Of the local branch, if you will. This became more complicated in 2012 when another group that was affiliated with Al-Qaeda in Iraq broke away from the Al-Qaeda organization and in 2013 also started to spread into Syria, which had been the domain of Al-Nusra as part of Al-Qaeda. Of course, that other group was the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, which although starting as part of Al-Qaeda would...
The Islamic State is ISIS.
Soon fight against Al-Qaeda. Now, in 2016, Al-Nusra Front would also break away from Al-Qaeda and would eventually fight against both members of Al-Qaeda who were still loyal to that organization and to those in the breakaway faction of ISIS. So the Al-Nusra Front, when they broke away from Al-Qaeda, gave themselves a new name, Jabhat Fatah al-Sham. And in 2017, an important merger of this group and several other key Islamist organizations in Syria led to the creation of a new group. And that is Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. This group became one of the most powerful Islamist forces, largely based in northern Syria, that was fighting against several other Islamist organizations and against the Assad government. However, what set HTS apart is that they pushed for a ceasefire between all the Islamist organizations in northern Syria to create a united front to fight against their other common enemies. In this case, some of the other Islamists who we've already mentioned, Al-Qaeda affiliated groups, and ISIS, who are...
It's so funny when Muslims fight one another, nobody seems to care. But when Jews try to defend themselves on the front of Gaza or on the front of the IRGC, the Ayatollah regime in Iran, the entire world seems to care and calling it a genocide. I'm sure that when Hayat Tahrir al-Sham was fighting ISIS, they were probably killing children as well, deliberately. Yet nobody seemed to care. Same from the other side as well. It just shows you the hypocrisy. Nobody gives a crap when Muslims die by other Muslims.
At that time were very powerful in northern Syria and across the border in Iraq. Something interesting about HTS is that they started to do this not with conventional forces, but rather counterinsurgency forces, using police and counter-terror units in the territory they controlled to break up ISIS and Al-Qaeda splinter cells. They also started to establish more centralized forms of government, in particular the Syrian Salvation Government that ruled over a part of northern Syria from this time onwards, instead of using the older Islamist technique of having local councils arranging everything and having a very hands-off approach to government. This government instead adopted the Turkish lira when under economic strain, sought to improve access to e-government, and during the COVID-19 pandemic, instituted social distancing measures and at times called off Friday prayers to stop the spread of infection, something that irked many hardliners in the group. They also sought to expand their ties with the neighboring SDF, or the Kurdish-led region across the Euphrates River in northeastern Syria. They also sought ties with other key groups. In 2018, for instance, working together with Turkish armed forces and their Turkish proxy, the SNA, or Syrian National Army, another rebel group in northern Syria, to combat insurgency by Al-Qaeda and ISIS members. Nevertheless, Turkey still labeled HTS as terrorists following this operation. But by
Hayat Tahrir al-Sham actually received a lot of its funding from Turkey by Erdogan. And the reason for that is because Erdogan saw the opportunity of taking over Syria as the best opportunity to spread Islam all around the world. Syria is a centerpiece for Islam, just like Mecca, Medina are, same as Sham. The so-called Palestinians call themselves Bilad al-Shamis, South Syrians. They always treated Syria as an empire. They wanted Syria to spread all over the Levant. That's what they wanted.
By 2020, they were clearly working together once again. By 2024, this group clearly had established itself as the most powerful faction in northern Syria. And it's clear that before their offensive began, there was a significant period of talks and deals going on behind the stages, which explains why so many Syrian government outposts fell so quickly. It's likely some of this was prearranged beforehand. They also were keenly aware of other events going on around the world, such as Assad's two key allies, the Russians, being involved so heavily in Ukraine, and Hezbollah having recently taken a heavy hit from Israeli attacks in Lebanon. Knowing then that they would be able to attack Syria while it was weakest, they mounted their assault in the north on Aleppo, which they captured in early December, and then kept going south to Hama. By the time that Homs had fallen, the highway was completely open to Damascus, and the end for Assad's regime, as rebels also attacked from the south. That leaves HTS and their leader, Mohammed al-Julani, in charge of a large part of Syria and largely in charge of Damascus too. The question is whether their Al-Qaeda past will determine their future.
We're clearly seeing that that's not the case because of the persecution of the Druze community. As we speak, they're getting killed, disrespected, and all the things that al-Julani said he was against. You have to realize that even if al-Julani is a good leader, the people themselves within Syria are different ethnic groups. And because they're different ethnic groups, it's going to be very difficult to merge these groups together with one another, like in Israel or in the UAE or different places, because the sense of being a nation is very strong and present there. Iraq is very similar to Syria because of the different ethnic groups as well. That's why it's going to be very difficult to have true peace in Syria.
Yes, it's still listed as a terrorist organization by the United States, Turkey, as already mentioned, and several other players too.
According to what I read, HTS is no longer considered to be a terrorist organization by the US.
However, they now have ousted the regime of Assad and appear to be in power in a large part of the country. So the question now will be, will they go back on their old Islamist ways? Or do they mean what they've been saying recently about respecting the rights of minorities and creating a somewhat more tolerable situation in Syria?
Al-Julani, like I said before, is a terrorist in a suit. Don't let his moderate front fool you. Every radical Muslim believes Sharia should be imposed on the entire world. So yes, getting Syria to be normalized is one thing. The next step is going to be conquering the rest of the world. And I know it may sound weird. I know it may sound exaggerated. That is the point of organizations coming out of the Muslim Brotherhood, imposing Sharia all over the world. Thank you so much for watching this video. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you'd like to support me financially, you can do that using Buy Me Coffee or Patreon down in the links in the description. And you can also join the Discord that we just opened in the links below. Thank you so much, and I'll see you again in the next video. Bye-bye.